experience, and I was joking with your dad before you came. Like I'd ask you that, your thing would be like I was born, but what do you first kind of remember about the Chaney program, going with dad, Chaney football?
Yeah.
Um, Maybe start there.
Yeah, so I mean, first off, like you said, I mean, I've listened to what you guys have been doing. Obviously, I hear about it from my dad, and I think it's great. I mean, I've listened to probably every episode, if not every one, pretty close to it. And I think for all the tradition, obviously, all the people that are still kind of involved in some way, shape, or form, and the feedback that you guys have gotten that I've even kind of indirectly heard, it's been great. So, you know, for me, it's hard. I don't know that I have a first memory. It's not like I can sit back and pinpoint one thing. I know the first year that I probably came around full time, or the first season was '96. I have a plaque because I'd go to the banquet. And I used to get a plaque every year, like all the me, the Popios, all of us that helped out, and we got one from '95, but I was not in the picture, and I know that season wasn't one of the better ones. It wasn't a bad year. I don't remember much from that year, but I do remember '96. For me as a kid growing up in Austintown, I mean, what I remember more than anything is Fitch. I as a young kid, I could never understand. There was actually a kid I graduated with, who's great family, great kid. His name's Sam Casano, and his dad Paul was an assistant at Fitch. Mm-hmm. And as a kid who doesn't really understand things, I never understood or could comprehend why at the school the teachers and the kids and everything would give, and I say this in the most respectful way possible, but give him the time of day because wait, your dad's an assistant. My dad runs the show here, at Chaney, and we beat you guys most years. In fact, I think one year, in fourth grade, maybe I was a Chaney football player for Halloween. He was a Fitch player, so it was, Chaney Fitch was the big thing. That's the biggest thing I remember is every year, all the summer, it was all building towards Fitch week. And, I'd go there and I mean, again, I graduated from Fitch. I went to Fitch. I'm team doctor for Fitch now. I grew up hating Fitch. I mean, there's no other way for me to say it. That was the rival. That was the big game. That was the kind of what kicked it off every year. So
'96. How old would you have been?
I would have been 8.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would be eight for that.
And going to probably Lloyd. Maybe
yeah.
Done? Okay.
Went to Lloyd, which actually I just drove by it not long ago. It's just an empty field. And I was joking with my wife. I tell her, I'm like, you don't understand. As a kid, this property, there's nothing on the property now, but it seemed so much bigger. Even when you go out for recess, the yards or the lot that butt up to the lot at the fence seemed like they were miles away. And now you look at it and you're like, oh, that's a couple hundred yards of property. It's not that big. But yeah, I went to Lloyd. Then I went to AMS. The building on Mahoning that's gone. Another just empty lot. And then Fitch, which is obviously still Fitch.
So, and I just asked that because I was thinking back in '96 when you start coming around every day, that's a really impressionable time. What were some of your memories there? I'm assuming you were going to doubles with Dad like you originally did?
As a kid, it kind of, it sucked because they would stain or whatever the gym floor, and that's what we did. We weren't we were managers in the sense of the word, but we weren't there doing everything on the field or actually I worked in the equipment room at YSU when I was at YSU for 2 years, and yeah, we ran practice. We're setting it up. We were very integral. As a kid, it was not that way at all. It was hangout time. Me and the Popios were playing around the world in the gym, and so. The point is, that's where doubles got really tough is they closed the gym down. First of all, there was volleyball that you had to kind of dance around, and they were in kind of their own camp. But then, the gym was shut down for a good portion of doubles where, hey, no one's allowed on it for a week. And, as a kid, that week felt like it was probably a month long. But I remember that, I remember going up and kind of hanging out in the gym. We'd come down around the field. I mean, this is a good story. I do remember, one time, almost kind of feeling guilty. Hey, I'm a manager. I should be involved. And so, I was obviously hanging out with my dad, and he had some of the skill players. I know he had the quarterbacks, and they were running through, now you see a lot, they have ladders, but you guys had, they were aluminum poles with, bungee cords on them. and
The ropes.
the ropes, yeah. And everybody ran through them. And his thing, he's like, all right, well, Antoine Floyd, who was quarterback, he's like, when he gets to the end, he's gonna, pitch you an option. And I'm like, all right, yeah, I'm ready. And I mean, again, I'm probably 9. And he came out and he fired this thing. He wasn't trying to hurt me. I mean, he's just, like he normally would. And I'm pretty sure it like bounced off my face. And it was, that was, as a young kid, you're kind of like, oh, it wakes you up a little bit. But, that kind of stuff. Just trying to help out, here and there when you can. So
yeah. Ron, what was it like bringing Ant to practice every day?
Well, it wasn't like babysitting because I did what I had to do, but being able to have your son with you doing what you do, it's obviously very special, and it certainly was. I mean, it was just because there was downtime and you bond and the game routine really kind of got to be a really great experience because I'd come home, pick him up, we'd go get something to eat and bring it back to the school. And
a lot of times you pick me up from school. I mean, that, like you said, the routine of that. I mean, I remember, I'd pack all my Chaney clothes in like my mother's, has a ton, still I'm sure to this day, like the Walmart bags, the plastic bags, just like drawers full of them. And so there'd be like, a plastic bag with like, sweats and a turtleneck and a Chaney sweatshirt, my hat, and, everything I'd wear to the game. And so, I'd get to school, obviously was never really an issue for me. And, teachers didn't care if I left early, even when I was, in like middle school towards like, more of the later years. And so I'd get to leave early. I'd bring a note in, like, excuse me, leave early.
Right.
I'd go and, get my clothes. He'd pick me up when he had to. I mean, it wasn't like I took advantage of it or anything. Whenever, with travel or transportation, whatever we had to, he'd come get me. We'd go get something to eat. We'd go to, the church on Bella Vista and, pray and say the stations. And, I mean, it was a routine, like he said. I mean, it was absolutely a routine. And not only so much all that before, but then after. I mean, this is before the days of the internet, before Twitter and social media and that kind of stuff. We'd get in the car and, what'd you have? It was that gray, was it Cadillac? No, it wasn't Cadillac.
No.
The Bonneville. Did you have like no, you had a LeSabre.
It was before the LeSabre. It was this gray, like, I don't even know what it was. But, we're in that, and, like, you're cranking the heat. It's freezing cold. And, like, we're listening to, AM 570 trying to hear scores and, like, highlight. I mean, that's what you did. Like, it's so different than what it is now. But, yeah, I mean, all that stuff. I mean, that shaped my upbringing. No different. I mean, I didn't play football. I certainly didn't play football at Chaney. But the program and kind of the morals of the program and the structure of the program is what kind of, guided my upbringing. I say that in the most obviously respectful way, but I think my dad would even say that, that, I mean, obviously that's how he built the program for a reason, but that's probably a lot of the same stuff that carried over in how he was as a parent. And so, all the things that those guys, and I'm sure the players felt like they were trying to do, even though I didn't play football, I mean, I was trying to emulate, whether it be in school or I mean, whatever it is I did, in school. So, I mean, all that stuff kind of tied in and was very much a routine. So,
were you guys waiting on the food truck during doubles?
I don't remember the food. I think the food trucks, like, right when I kind of stopped, like, that timed up, like, that's pretty close to that when they were coming around doing that. I'm pretty sure that's about like when I was starting to get a little bit older, like maybe close to end of middle school, starting to get into high school, because I don't remember that much.
Yeah, I would think that the cart when Fred Royer and his wife were delivering the food at lunch would have been after that. Yeah. But you were there for the post-game pizza.
Oh, the pizza was legendary. I mean,
Winner's Pizza.
Winner's Pizza. That's Danny Povio. I mean, he coined that, and I mean, it was great. Like, I mean, again, you talk about like routine and this being an event, like that for me, that's what Fridays were all about. You know, it was life or death. I mean, when Chaney lost, it was like, you know, and I'm a Steelers fan now, and I get upset when they lose, but I mean, this was like catastrophic. But when they won, I mean, shoot, you know, and again, we talk about no social media and stuff. We used to wheel in like the big TV. You know, on like the big cart and everything.
Oh, wow.
And we would hook that up. And
good call.
Wow. If we were able to watch like, you know, the 11 o'clock news and see the highlights, like it was awesome. As a kid, it felt like, you know, hey, we won and we're watching the highlights and we're sitting here eating pizza. You know, it was great. You know, everything was good. The only thing that made it better was if we could convince someone to turn the lights on in the gym. So we could run around and, you know, throw the football a little bit. And they never wanted to because they knew the overflow traffic from the lobby would spill in and people would hang longer. And then the custodian was there late and he never wanted to be. So it was rare to get the lights to go on. But when they did, we were always pretty happy. Again, you didn't have cell phones then. You couldn't use your flashlight. I mean, none of that. You know, this wasn't that long ago. But that was the time that it was.
And that all segued into inside high school football. When
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that. I remember, you know, in 97, like, when they came to the school, like, I think I was 10 or close to, maybe 9, turning 10. So I remember that. You know, I remember, I still remember your uncle, Pat. You know, he was great. He always took time out of his schedule to come, or you know, come up to interview, talk to me, and, you know, was always very involved in stuff. And, I mean, he was great. All that stuff, you know, with the inside high school football and the interviews, and a couple times I even went with you when they were doing the Arby's overtime, like pre-season special thing.
Oh yeah.
A couple times we had it up in the DeBartolo room, and like all the coaches, like Dick Engel was there, and Gary Smith from Boardman.
John Turco had.
John Turco, I'm sure, was there. I remember Gary Smith because I probably went 3 years in a row, and every year Gary Smith would talk about kids not even having hair under their armpits yet. Like, that was his quote.
And you're like, what?
I'm
what
like,
are you talking about?
I mean, I'm probably a 10, 11-year-old kid at the time. But
They used to have, I remember those, and those were really enjoyable. And I do remember when they had it in that DeBartolo room.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They'd either have it there or they'd have it at the Lions Club in Boardman.
Okay.
Yeah, operating engineers hall in
McClurg there.
on McClure, correct.
And I remember they would, like, Butchie would get up there and say, we're slow and we're small. And then they'd come out and win 9 games. And then Coach Angle would get up there and make fun of Turco.
Yes.
And Turco would get up there and make fun of Coach Angle. And then Grandy from Struthers would get up there and talk about all the new recruits that he had.
St. Ruthers.
Yeah. It was just a it was enjoyable time.
It was fun. Yeah. I mean, even for me as a young kid that probably didn't understand a lot of, like, you know, some of the backwards humor or the jabs, I thought it was hilarious. You know, hearing these guys that, you know, as a 10-year-old kid, you see these coaches on TV. Even my dad. I mean, everyone. I think it's normal as a kid to, you know, think your dad's is the best at what he does and is at the top of the world and everything. But, you know, also as a 10-year-old kid, I'm not seeing much difference between my dad and Bill Cowher. You know, was coaching the Steelers at the time. You know what I mean? It just, you don't kind of make those distinctions in your head. So then you're at an event like this, and these guys are all poking fun at each other, and you don't maybe understand the humor, but you're just to hear it or kind of be in the moment. It was fun, you know, to be a part of that. So
yeah, I don't think they do that anymore.
I don't think so
either. That was really a good event.
I think they tried
Boardman Lions Club put it on.
What was the sports one of the sports radios? I think just maybe the last 2 years or the year before, they did something like that. They tried to reinvigorate it from a couple of the leagues.
WNIO maybe.
The one out there in Boardman, Sports. I'm not sure.
I'm sure Denny Liebert was involved.
Is Denny Liebert still with us?
I don't know. I think so. So.
Do you even know who Danny Liebert is?
I know who Danny Liebert is, yeah. Well, he used to call the house, like, you know, back then when I was living at home, obviously, as a kid, we just had the landline, and he referred to himself as Liebert. Like, he'd ask for my dad. I'm like, oh, he's not home. He's like, oh, I'll tell him Liebert called. And very fast talker. I talk fast, but he talks even faster.
Yeah. They used to have a rundown show after the games. On our way home, we would listen to all the scores.
And that's the same thing. It's funny you say that because that's the same thing that when I'd come home with Braden from games, it was up until a couple years ago they were still doing that.
Yeah, right.
And that was, you're looking forward to catch scores and see what's going on, and now you just follow Twitter all night. And
I recall that East loss in '97. Coming home, and you and your sister were sitting at the table with you guys, and because we hadn't lost a city game in 7 years, so his entire tenure with us was predicated on winning every time you lined up against a city opponent.
Not just winning, but dominating. Like, it not even being a game, really. And I shouldn't say. I mean, I'm sure there, if you were to go through every year that I was involved as a kid, I'm sure there were a couple games that were maybe a little closer.
Sure.
But for the most part, you just kind of, you looked at those. Certainly, I don't think you guys did. But as a kid, you looked at it and said, okay, well, that's when we're going to win, that you feel good about. And then to lose and then be pretty good, almost kind of like two, A's going at each other. Yeah, it was very much kind of a, whoa, I didn't think this was even possible. I remember that. I distinctly remember the Canfield loss in '96. Yeah. I remember getting on the bus, and the reason I remember it, all the managers, we're all 9-8-year-old kids. We're crying. I mean, kids are crying. They were obviously shocked that they were going to win. And I remember kind of almost, as a kid getting on Pat, you're not crying, you don't care, we care. I remember that being a really big shock. Nobody expected that comment. So that was a tough one. You remember those, unfortunately, as much as you remember some of the really big wins, which I do remember too. I could go through and name games like the Walsh game and Anthony Floyd making me put my head on a scale because he wanted to see how much it weighed after that game.
Why?
He had this thing that I have a big head. He used to tell me all the time, Coach, your son's got a big head. And so...
because he said he felt the same way about me.
Yeah.
I mean, and he wasn't talking about ego. He was
meaning
physically,
physical
big head. Yeah, yes,
physically big head.
The volume of your skull and your head is
you know
big.
what?
And that picture, by the way, this is that picture. This is one of the...
That's from that game, yeah.
From the Walsh game.
Yeah.
And
we'll scan that, put that up. We'll take a picture of that, put that up. So I'll come back to that. So that's one of the big memories.
Oh,
is,
for sure.
Is that Walsh game, that 96, the tough loss.
Yeah.
Now, was that, side note, was that an upset in your mind, Ron? Well, you never looked at any game as 100% winnable or losable, but I mean, for the average observer, who was the favorite?
Well, we knew they had a real big fullback and they had a scat back that was really good, and they were really good. They had, they were a perennial power.
Yeah.
And they were expected to make a run at the state championship. We thought, but beating the number one team in the state in Minerva in the opener, and then beating East and getting redemption, going in, we were playing our best football.
Mm-hmm.
We were, and to be honest, we thought we had enough talent that we could certainly play with them, and the weather, was a factor.
It was cold. I remember, kind of cold. It was raining.
Yeah,
too.
it was rainy and cold. Yeah, absolutely. And our kids just played lights out. I mean, they really did, and especially defensively. Antoine and Anthony came up with the big play, and Ollie had a big catch.
So Walsh, were they the AP state champs, or was it Minerva?
Minerva.
Okay.
I don't number one in the state.
They were ranked number one in the state,
Yeah.
so I'm guessing they were AP champs. Yeah.
Okay, or maybe in that region, whatever. So they're number one. Walsh. I think the I mean, the difference that you guys had against everybody in there is you could throw the football at that point in time.
Right. Yeah, especially, you go, again, you go back to the Minerva game, and we played them at Salem, and it was rainy
Muddy.
and muddy, and we threw the ball like it was 80 and sunny. I mean, and that's a tribute to Antoine Floyd, who was our quarterback. He had a big game, and he had a big game against East as well.
And playing great defense.
Yeah, I
well.
can't emphasize that enough. That we're shutting down Minerva. We're for the most part shutting down East, and then when you're playing a team like Walsh, rising to the occasion again and playing great defense, and then doing the same thing in the state championship game.
That's the biggest thing. As a almost 10-year-old kid, that I remember about that year. Honestly, it's the defense. I mean, it's easy to look at Antoine and Anthony Floyd. I mean, they get a ton of recognition, as they should. They were both excellent, and on the surface, that's again kind of maybe more the distracting thing or the low-hanging fruit. That's, I guess, a good way to say that. Because of how good they were, but maybe more, to my dad's point, under the radar somewhat. I remember that team making a number of really important goal line stands, like with games on line. Struthers comes into my brain. I distinctly remember that, and I've told him before. I know you and I were texting Dallas. As a kid, I remember. So I lived in Massillon. I did my residency in Massillon, and then I was back there this year. I'm team doctor for Fitch. We played at Massillon this year, and it's funny because I'm standing on the field, and I remember being in this exact same position. I'm 35 now, so this would have been, 26 years ago. And so as a kid, I'm standing there on the goal line, and I'm thinking, they're going to do it again. And they held him on first, second down, and I swear, and I'll take it to my grave, the kid, I don't know if they ran dive or if it was just a sneak, but he wasn't in. I know I watched it. He his helmet didn't even cross the plane. And he goes back, and I think it was the back judge comes in, signals touchdown, and it was kind of like, what? And even more than that, I remember, that being a big deal. That night, and you guys talked about it on this podcast before, my parents went out. I think Mom had a reunion or something. I was over at a friend's house, and they didn't know. I mean, again, I live in Austintown, like, Chaney Football is nothing to them. But, again, your uncle was on the news on 21. They had it, and he has the same camera, and I'm almost thinking like I'm going to be in the camera shot because I had the exact same viewpoint, and the cameraman must have been either in front of me or just off to the side, and Pat played it frame by frame, and you can see he doesn't get across it. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like, hey, you guys do the math or make your own assumption, but he doesn't look into me, and that being a big thing. So I remember that very distinctly from that year, that there were a number of times where that team came up very, very tough, in an important moment to stop a team with a, goal situation to go, or, needed a short yard in the middle of the field or something like that.
Yeah, I concur. The defense was just phenomenal, but you also can't, lose track of the fact that Antoine Floyd in 2 years threw 52 touchdown passes.
Unreal. Yeah.
I mean, there ain't anybody. You talk about Hall of Fame potential. There ain't anybody that, and you got a Heisman Trophy and a first team All American in Matt and Frank Sinkowicz, Matt Cavanaugh and Frank Sinkowicz, and those kind of numbers are staggering.
And as a 9-year-old kid, back to this thing, I mentioned before, you don't see any distinction between your dad as a coach and maybe guys at the Division I college, other guys you see on TV. As a kid looking up to these guys, they were all kind of like professional football players in a way. I remember, and I think about that sometimes too, especially in what I do now as a physician for even Fitch, and the kids, they're bigger. I think across sports, kids are just in general faster, stronger, whatever. But I look at them and they look so much smaller to me now, Whereas when I was a 9-year-old kid, they looked like professional athletes. They looked huge, and not just in physical appearance, but a guy like Antoine Floyd. I remember looking at him thinking, I mean, this guy's going to play in the NFL. He's like he's unreal how good he is, and his brother obviously immensely talented, and the list goes on and on.
It's funny because I'd heard a quote not too long ago about it's a powerful thing when your idols, your heroes are people that you can touch. So it's one thing to really love sports, be a fan of a team, but when you get to go to practice every day,
oh, for sure,
and you get to see them and have relationships with them,
for
have
sure.
them tell them, hey, I'm gonna weigh your head, have those interactions, it's even more impactful.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, I even at Fitch, I graduated 2006. My senior year, I'm wearing Brad Smith's Missouri jersey to school, on Fridays, like before a game, and they're kind of like, what's that black? Is that Steelers jersey? Like, I mean, the majority of people didn't know, and the people, or the kids in my class, friends of mine who really knew, obviously they understood. But yeah, it's like, you guys don't understand. I'm not just a Brad Smith fan. Like, I know Brad. I mean, when I grew up, when he was playing high school, I watched him, become Brad Smith. And so when you can do that and you kind of have that personal connection, yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool to kind of grow up with and see that. And back to kind of the whole program thing, you're watching that program kind of shape those guys. And again, I did not play football, but a lot of the ideals, I guess, from that program, you're watching that kind of shape these guys who they are, and it gives you something to kind of strive for, with some of those types of things.
So you graduated in 2006. Your dad's still coaching at Chaney.
Mm-hmm.
So from 5, 4, 3, 2. So from like 2002 to 2005, you're at Fitch.
Mm-hmm.
You're playing Fitch. What was that kind of like? Since it's not just your dad, but you've been like ingrained in that program. How was that for you?
I did not go to a Chaney Fitch game until my senior year. I think, that was probably, it's not like, anyone was going to say anything to me. They all knew it. Even as a senior, I'll be honest, I wore a red and gray polo and I sat on the Chaney side my senior year. And they all knew. The librarian was the one who took my ticket at the front, and he just kind of he didn't shake his head judgmentally, but kind of they all understood. But I guess as a freshman coming in, to a big school, I think Fitch was a little bigger in terms of class sizes than it is now. I didn't really know what to expect, and so I couldn't. And I always said this: I could never go, and I was not going to root against my dad and root against Chaney. I didn't have it in my heart. I wanted Chaney to win. It's what I knew growing up. It's what I told you, I circled that date figuratively, and you always look to that. I remember the first year, my freshman year, Chaney won. That was the only year that Chaney won when I was in school. It was a game that had to be finished the next day. It was like a thunder, lightning situation and stuff.
Yeah. That was Pelini's last year.
And had to hold on. They kind of made a run the next day, and I remember listening on the radio and stuff to the game, because again, there's this YSN and all these things that exist now, which are awesome for these kids coming up, but we didn't have any of that. I wasn't able to actually watch the game. I just listened on the radio, and so it was tough. Tough in the sense, I even remember as much as my freshman year, not going to the game. But then week 2, I was there. I went. I wasn't a manager per se, but still kind of wanting to be involved, because I of course I was a fan. I was a fan of what he was doing and stuff. But then my sophomore year, we talked about how kind of and Chaney Fitch was always competitive. It was never really, or very rarely, a blowout either way. But I would say up to that point, Chaney probably won. If you were to add up the scores and the years, Chaney probably won the majority of them. My sophomore year being the first year that I can remember in recent memory where Fitch actually won. It was a very close game.
That was maybe Justin Hood.
I think so.
We lost a tight one, maybe.
It was
2003?
Close. It was close.
2003.
because John Meng, who's a great guy, John's a great athlete. He's still kind of involved with Austintown to this day. I remember hearing him on the radio say, like, they interviewed him after, and him saying, Austintown's back or something like that, and it kind of angered me, like almost being like, what are you talking about back? Like, you beat us 1 year. But yeah, that was tough. It was tough as a kid, and I don't think anybody else would really understand unless they were in those shoes. It's one thing just have your dad be, that's his thing, but like it was more than that to me. It was family. I mean, it was part of who we were, and so yeah, I was still very much invested in it, even though I was obviously going to school at the rival per se.
So let me ask you this, and you tell me if this is too. You said a couple times you didn't play. You were obviously an athlete. You played basketball and you had athletic skills. Was that maybe part of a motivation as to why maybe you didn't pursue anything in high school? Maybe.
You mean like why I didn't
play football? Like,
yeah,
because you would inevitably have to play against Chaney or your dad or whatever the case may be.
I think so. I think that was always in the back of my mind. I mean, as a kid, like even younger, I tried playing football when it was a whirlwind. Like I was like running with no pads day one. The next day, day two, we were in full pads, full contact. And trust me, it wasn't anything about contact. It was just more like, this is like learning to sip from a fire hose, man. Like,
sure.
And so at that time, and I was probably 8 years old. I was very young. It was like it just wasn't a good fit for me for whatever reason. But I think in the back of my mind going forward, I mean, as a kid, we'd play football in the backyard, us and the neighborhood guys, and we'd tackle, we'd mess around. But I think it was always as I got older, like, well, you're not playing for Chaney. You're not going to Chaney. I kind of knew from a schooling standpoint that was never happening. Nothing against Chaney, just we lived in Austintown. There was no open enrollment back then, and we would have had to move and whatever. So yeah, I think it was like, well, okay, that's fine. Never get too attached to this because you're not putting on the enemy colors, so to speak, and playing against him and the program you grew up idolizing, all these years. So yeah, I think it was like, all right, well, see what else you're good at or what else you like. And as a kid, I liked basketball a lot, and I kind of took to that, and that was good enough for me. I played baseball a little bit too here and there, and it was kind of a good way to be involved in athletics, and obviously, even to this day, I still enjoy sports and athletics and try and stay involved with that kind of stuff, if nothing else as a fan, but not have to compete against, what you've always known, what you love, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's absolutely fair.
Yeah, and I know there was never any pressure on my part, you expose and whatever they gravitate to, and he gravitated to basketball, and that was his decision, and he made his mark. He became captain and had a great career there, and
Let's be honest. My senior year. We won 2 games. We were down. We were in the middle of a coaching change. That's obviously not the point of any of this. But yeah. I mean, I was a small guy, and I wasn't the most skilled guy. I was scrappy. My career, if you will, as a basketball player, there's no stats. I mean, we didn't win games. You'll never read about any of that in any history books. But I kind of cut my teeth the same way I progressed in the rest of my life through school and in medicine now, just by trying to work hard. My goal was always I'm going to outwork it. Obviously lifting weights and stuff is not as important in basketball as maybe is in football, but my goal was to be pound for pound the strongest guy on our team, and I was. My best friend, who was our best player, was much taller than me, and I'd body him up in the paint. And he used to tell me, he'd look at me and say, I hate going against you trying to rebound. He said, because it's just too hard to move you. And again, it wasn't anything about, I wasn't this freak athlete or anything. I just was scrappy. My senior year, we played against McKinley, who was back-to-back champs. They beat us by 82. But Raymore Morgan was a guy who's All-American, went to Michigan State, was All-American, played overseas. And I remember just going after him, saying, I'm going to hit him legally, of course, as hard as I can. Nah, that's not me being tough or anything. That's just what I knew, was just to be to be play as hard as I could, do everything as hard as I could, and just know that if it didn't work out or if I missed a shot or whatever, hey, I gave the best I could, and there was never anything that I left out there, so to speak. And that's kind of all the stuff I learned from Chaney, listening to him, listening to guys like yourself and the other coaches and stuff. I mean, that's just the culture. That's that West Side culture, and that's what's been kind of instilled in me from every day. I mean, if you even go beyond sports and stuff, I remember as like a first grader coming home one time, got like a B on a spelling test. And I remember, my dad would come home every day and he'd have his yellow legal pad, and that's what he did. And he's, charting. And I don't even know how it came up. My mom brought it up or something, but him just looking at me and saying, "Are you proud of that?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, B's are good." And he's like, "Well, is that the best you could have done?" I'm like, "Well, no. I mean, I guess I could have gotten an A." And he's like, "Well, okay." And, I mean, that was the end of it. There was no pressure. There was no disappointment. It was just a simple question. And that was the kind of stuff that would always stick with me. It was always like, okay, it's never good enough. And I don't mean that like I never felt like what I did was good enough for my parents. I don't mean that at all. I meant like internally, kind of harboring that like you always can do better. And I try and do that now. Even in surgery, I have perfect surgery, and I always try and walk away from it or on my drive home say, what could I have done better? What can I do to make that faster or better for next time? And again, like that's not unique to Chaney, but that is Chaney, in my opinion. That kind of mentality. That's why they had the success that they did, and why, you guys brought them success that you did. And as a young kid, I picked up on that kind of stuff, I tried to hang on every word when I would sit there, listen. It was an event for us. And I'm sure if you had the Pobio kids on here, not kids now, but from when they were, or Ryan Kelly, who I know had a very successful career, not only as a player, but, what he's doing now. Any of the guys that were kind of around us that were my age, I'm sure they would tell you the same thing. It was an event for us to hear the pregame. Mm-hmm. We wanted to be there for the postgame and hear every word of it. We felt like we were involved, and at least for me, those kind of things, and as maybe some of those guys that were playing or were learning lessons, I think I was too. I just didn't realize it at the time.
Because that's the Chaney way.
I think, circling back to the evaluation piece, and it's never good enough. I think that was just, and Ron will say it was from Red and from Ed and from Chess, but I can specifically speak to, I think, I was influenced by the men in my life, and then that was also, what I kind of saw at Ursuline as a player, and then that was also what was presented professionally, as I stepped into it as a craft from Ron. And I think he used to always say, swish it around in your mouth, enjoy it, and then we're back to work tomorrow. Yeah. Right? That attitude of, okay, you know what? It was a good job, but if we're going to continue to grow, get better, improve, you always need to reflect.
100%.
And I think in today's society of, not using the cliche of, well, it's good enough.
Yeah.
You get better or you get worse, you never stay the same.
Right. That's the trap. It's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay.
And acting like you've scored before, as a kid, and as I started to get older and become a teenager or whatnot, I remember almost being frustrated with him. Like him being my dad, I'd ask him every week. He'd come home and I'd say, how did everybody look? Like, because obviously you're going to school, whether I have basketball practice or not. If it's out of season, I mean, I'm not going to practices during the school year. This was all my involvement more summer and then Friday nights, mm-hmm. And you could never get anything, at least I could never get anything out of them. Like, well, how did everybody go today? Well, we're not ready yet. Like, on a Monday. Okay. Right. Tuesday, how do we look today? Well, right. Still not ready. A little bit better, but we could be playing, a team, and I won't, out of, if nothing else, respect, I don't want to belittle any other school or program, but, Chaney could be playing a team that they were obviously, if there were odds, with the world we live in now with betting and stuff, they would be the overwhelming favorite. You never knew that from talking to him. I mean, it was like, right. Well, they're good. They got a good running back. They do this well. They're well coached. And then you go out and you win 41-0. It's like, well, hell, they were good. So my point is, I think as I grew and I started to understand more, you started to pick up on that kind of stuff. But the point I was trying to make is when they would win, well, that's what we were supposed to do. It was never like, yeah, look at us, pointing the finger, flashy. It's we took care of business. That's what we did. Not saying you can't enjoy it, but in fact, I think that's what made, like, for instance, that 97 season so memorable for me. Like, I remember as a kid when they handed my dad the regional trophy and him kind of showing some emotion and holding it up, because I can only imagine from his standpoint in his career what that moment was like. And as a kid, I remember seeing that and thinking, wow, he's really happy, like more than I normally see him happy after a win. So, yeah, I mean,
It's funny you say that about, like, going into games when you should just whack somebody.
Yeah, right.
And it's and like, as a coach, working for him, you watch films, and especially
right. Of course
as players,
right?
But there, you're right. We're still getting our 4 films. We're still breaking everything down. We're still going through. We still got 16 pages of blocking adjustments, and but there was a genuineness to it. It wasn't
100%.
Like,
no, absolutely.
It wasn't like I got to put on a show for these guys.
Nope.
Because it was. But I think, to me, and if I think about it, right? So, like, if you have 5 games out of the year and 4 of them, you should be able to show up and do pretty well.
Yeah.
Well, as a coach, for him preparing me to be better as a coach, that's 4 weeks of opportunities that I didn't get better at my craft, that I didn't get better at game planning, I didn't get better at watching film. Yeah. So all of a sudden when it matters, I can't go flip the switch. Yeah. And time to do work. Well, no, you just missed 4 weeks of. So really, it's kind of the same thing you talk about with the players too. Yeah.
It's the humility. That's, I think, something that. Not to go philosophical and big picture, but you look at today and you look at some of the stuff you see, whether it's on TV, whether it's at the national level or whatever, or even outside of sports, and I've always tried to be very humble, and I still try. I really try. I tell in my career and what I do, I try and use those things, and that's one thing I've always tried to promise myself that I always will maintain. And again, I think that was very much. I think if you had a good sampling of players and coaches that were involved with Chaney from the times that we're talking, from the beginning to the end of this era or this run, I would like to think they would all tell you that. They learned that they, even guys you guys have had on this podcast that I've heard, I was texting you, I listened to the episode where you guys had Lamar Sykes. Mm-hmm. It was an awesome episode. I mean, I got to know Lamar a little bit just because he's only a year older than me. We went to YSU together. Awesome guy. And hearing kind of what he's doing with his life, I remember even hearing my dad say in that episode, like, well, hey, I'm really proud of you, but it's expected. Mm-hmm. Again, we're back to that point. It's like, not belittling it or demeaning any of the accomplishments, but that's what you're supposed to do. Not surprised by it, and I think that is so indicative of what we're talking about. What that program and that culture and that part of the community embodied, and what I think was represented all those years, and hopefully is still represented today with what all those people are doing in all aspects of their life. It's cool to see. And for me, even if I was a lot younger than some of those guys, or a different path in my life or career or whatever, you almost kind of feel like a sense of sameness or like a common connection there. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, hey, I get it too. I try and do that as well. So, even if you didn't play or you weren't necessarily a part of the same types of things, there's a bond there, and that's. I think that's cool. I think that is something that is really good to be proud of and good to have.
Ron, what was it like for you? Kind of, we've heard Anthony's side of traveling through with it on traveling through with it from a son to a father. What was it like for you having him with you there?
It was awfully gratifying. It was, like I said, the picture that you're going to scan and show, or what was shown before, that major college coaches would come through our office, okay? And I would always make it a point to show them this picture and tell them this is what it's all about. You know, being able to share any successes and, you know, and be consoled with any failures with your family. And, you know, to have your son, your only son, with you during those special times, and being a part of those special times is indescribable. I mean, it really is. It's just was so gratifying, and I'm so appreciative of being able to have that in my life that you know, I'll take it with me forever.
I know for me, you know, there were times where like when I was coaching, my son was just born, so you know there were times where you don't see him for 2 days, not because you're not coming home, but by the time they go to sleep, I mean, it's that was probably right around the time when Anthony was born, right? So was it also an opportunity to kind of, you know, be around and you know, spend time together, you know, because it inevitably, if you're coaching for a long time, it beats a family up.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and you know, to further that, when his sister came with us,
Right.
My daughter Stephanie, and now, was it the same? No, I mean she. That was more of a babysitting deal, and to be honest, I didn't do a very good job at that because she would be driving the golf cart.
Right, the golf cart. I was waiting for it. Yeah. I remember that.
But you know, in the middle of talking to the team, it would be like, well, wait a second, I got to deal with this.
You almost wish like Twitter and TikTok and those things existed back then, because there'd be some good videos. Like somebody would have a phone, you know, and he's giving this impassionate speech, and all of a sudden you see this golf cart like go in the background, and this girl you know, driving hands and flipping over it. So yeah, I mean there are some good stories there for sure.
But yeah, you know, like I said, to be able to have my only son and then my daughter, I mean, was just really a special situation, and not to take the light off of Anthony, but that night I remembered that we talked about that East game, and I remember this. I remember talking to them at the kitchen table and saying, "Hey, listen, you know, we'll be back, and you know, it's okay. I mean, you know, stuff happens, and you know, they were better than us today, and you know, no crying about it. You know, tomorrow we're going to get up and face the day, and you know, they went to bed, and I remember going to bed and sitting there and staring at the ceiling, and not being able to fall asleep, and in the middle of the night, the door creaked open. My daughter come creeping into the room, and I shut my eyes to pretend that I was sleeping. And she came and she crept up to the bed and she kissed me on the cheek and then ran out.
I don't remember that. I don't remember the talk at the table, so that's cool. And to be fair, I mean, that's been one of the really cool things, and I've told other people this about what you guys are doing podcasts. Again, I mean, I think, you know, we can agree. I mean, I lived a lot of this, you know, from my perspective. Obviously, you know, maybe there's things I saw, some things I didn't see, but I lived it. But it's so cool to hear what you guys are doing, because there's each episode that you do or person you talk to, there's things I never heard, you know, like that. I mean, I'm 35, and you know, we talk about this stuff all the time. I mean, we live, you know, less than a mile and a half down the street from each other now, and so we talk all the time, and that's never something that's ever come up, not for any reason other than just it hasn't,
right.
You know. So when you start hearing some of these things, it's cool to kind of fill in some of those things, or something that you care so much about, even still, to learn things more. You know, as someone who always kind of appreciates the history of things, I you know, I never get sick of it, and I never get sick of hearing more about it.
Yeah, and I think it's enjoyable to hear all the connections and how all the stories kind of blend together. I know when I came on '99 through, so that would have been a couple years that you were there.
Yeah.
I remember you guys had one heck of a ball boy football team.
Oh man, we were the 2000 year, the year that unfortunately lost to Niles. Brad's senior year. We were loaded. Can I say that? Like Danny Popio was starting to get I mean, he wasn't mature yet. He was still a young kid, but like really starting to kind of, I guess, tap into his athletic ability. Michael Popio was obviously a great athlete, and those guys just, I mean, they were the workhorses, man. We'd go find them. We'd say we're gonna find the if there's any ball boys or trainers, and we're gonna go beat them. We started challenging them in the games and stuff. At halftime and after the game, and so Chaney was obviously very good that year. I mean, obviously they went 10-0, and it was kind of our thing. Like, well, they're gonna win and we're gonna win too. So
go 2-0 for the night.
Yeah, that's right. And then eat the winner's pizza afterwards.
Yeah,
so,
there you go.
Yeah, that would be. I remember that stuff too, and I'm sure if you talk to the Popios and I mentioned Ryan Kelly, those are the three names that I remember that were probably involved the most. I'd be curious, just because with life getting in the way, obviously we were all young at the time, we've kind of lost touch. I guarantee you, if we saw each other on the street tomorrow, so to speak, you'd be able to instantly have a conversation. I'd be really shocked if they didn't remember that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, definitely. I just have one more question, and Ron, you can kind of tie it up, and Anthony add anything in. I guess so. Everybody we've talked to had the view of the Chaney Football Program and Ron from the player point of view. What's maybe some insight that you could give from your point of view that maybe people wouldn't know about your dad, and not
Yeah, no.
but I mean from that coaching standpoint, from the football side, whatever. What was your kind of view as Anthony of all this stuff taking place and going on?
Yeah, so I know, like I mentioned at the beginning. I mean, I think it's normal for any kid, especially I guess probably a son to a father, to look up and say, well, hey, my dad's the best. I have a 4-year-old, and I'm sure he would act the same way and wouldn't even know what he's saying. Just it's almost like that's ingrained in your head. But for me, I think having that connection and kind of living that, it's one thing, and this is in no disrespect to anyone who's, father's an accountant or whatever, but with what my dad's doing, there actually is a win and a loss. You know what I mean? There are tangible results that you're not just hearing about, but you're living with them. So you're kind of living and you're experiencing that, and it's like, hey, I don't got to tell you my dad's really good at what he does. Hey, he's showing it, or just tune in. And as a kid, just kind of wanting to be a part of it. I mean, I remember, even in 4th grade, we had to do some kind of project. Mine was on the '97 Chaney football team, and scanning pictures. I mean, and probably these kids, these other 9-year-old kids that, like you said, Lloyd Elementary, they couldn't care less. Probably most of them didn't even care about the NFL. But to me, it was a big deal.
Right.
And so, and it still is a big deal, obviously. And so, kind of, I think, the biggest thing I'd take away is what you saw of my dad. It wasn't like there was a different persona for the camera, so to speak. Not that there were cameras around a lot or anything, but there was never any kind of a show. I mean, what I saw of him on the field and with guys and players and the coaches was the same guy that came home and was with us. Maybe as I started to get a little bit older and understood a little bit more kind of everything, seeing the losses, kind of how they would affect him, maybe it was easier for him to, I don't want to say hide that, it sounds deceptive, but as a kid, maybe you're not as concerned, but as you start to age, I almost, as much as I cared deeply about Chaney and them winning just because of his involvement, our family's involvement, you almost kind of really started to want them to win, if for no other reason, well, hey, Dad's going to be in a lot better place, like, for us as a family. You know, he's not going to be as upset and kind of down in the dumps, you know, for the weekend. And, hey, if the game's on a Friday, they're meeting all day Saturday as coaches and stuff. You know, after a tough loss, he might come home and just kind of be, obviously, for good reason, kind of upset, you know, and he's more fun after a win. So, hey, you know, let's win. So, maybe that part of it, you know, just kind of seeing some of those things like the human element. I mean, I think anyone would be, I know in my career, I mean, there's tough days I have where I'm probably at home, if you were to ask my wife, or obviously my son's young, but, you know, I'm more depressed than what maybe I give off to patients or people, you know, that I work with and stuff. So seeing maybe more of that human element, that, hey, there's a human being here that cares so deeply about this and strives so much to be good at this and to help all these people that are involved, you know, kind of seeing that and remembering it, hey, that's my dad. You know, that's not just a person like that. That's my dad, you know. So obviously no one wants to see someone they care about and they love, their family, someone who's done everything for them, suffer or you know, be upset. And, you know, you got to deal with that too.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I asked Ron. Like, I don't know if you remember this, Ron. You know, when you were going through all those years early on, and it's like, it's tough. You're losing. You're so close, and you know you're saying, hey, got to keep everybody going. And that's where I said, well, who keeps you going? Because that when you're the leader, you got to wear that hat. But at some point, you know, it's tough because, as Anthony was saying, your family does pick you up, and that's what you said too. Like, if you don't have that, that's a really rough place to be.
Yeah, and just to add to that, absolutely, if without the family structure, you know, you'd be in a deep abyss. But part of that puzzle too is the staff, and I did mention that.
Yeah.
Is, you know, if we didn't coach together, and you and the rest of the guys coached for me, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And it wasn't us coaching.
Yeah.
Instead of me and them coaching for me,
Right.
It would be really difficult.
Yeah.
And so that combined with in the family unit, my wife, my two kids, and the rest of my family.
Sure.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because even as a kid, I remember that too. I remember feeling that connection, that family. I mean, with everybody. I mean, shoot, I remember Dallas even like going to like a weightlifting practice, and this was probably like a year or two after you started, and I'm probably a 12-year-old kid, and I'm talking to you about PlayStation, you know, like Twisted Metal and games and stuff, you know, and so there was that, but then for every one of those times was someone like you or Roy Guy or Mick, you know, whatever. There were the banquets, and me and the other guys, the Popios and stuff at ITAM, there was always a peppercini eating contest, who could eat the most and not. You know, they're just little fun things like that, and you always hoped the party would go on. Like, well, hey, maybe if the banquet time's up this year, where Martin Luther King Day is the next day, we don't have school, all the coaches will come over to our house. The Christmas parties that started to get more and more, you know, legendary as the years went on, and some of the videos and stuff that you made and the other coaches and those guys still. I mean, I told you you know, I take care of Fitch now, but even before that, for a year when I first got back to the area, I helped out obviously at Western Reserve, and seeing Bill Miller on the sideline in Springfield. I mean, I haven't seen him in years, but you know, you can pick up kind of right where you left off, you know, and that's the kind of stuff, to his point about the family element and the other coaches kind of helping you through the ups and downs. You know, even as a young kid, you know, I hope anyone listening to that, you know, hears that and hopefully smiles when they hear that, because for me, that was cool, and that was one of the biggest takeaways, is that we were all so connected. And I still don't forget any of that. You know, that's all. It was very important to me then, and it's important to me now. You know, and that's testament to you guys. You know, and the commitment you guys put in, and you know what you guys all did together. it's been nice to hear some of the guys that have come on to say, hey, we were never able to duplicate it. We went other places, we've had success, and things have been different, some things the same, but the one thing that we can never get close to is kind of that connection we had. And, as a young kid, I felt that too. Yeah. Even though I was not nearly old enough to understand it probably like I do now,
Well, Ron?
I want to make one thing perfectly clear. This isn't, having you on has been great, Anth. It's something that we talked about, and but this isn't about a father's adulation for his son or a son's adulation for his father. This is about someone that was a part of our program at the peak of its success, and made a contribution and carried part of the program with him to go on to become a success in the classroom, on the basketball court, and now as a very successful orthopedic surgeon. And it's not only a pleasure to have you here and be able to do this, but it's great to have a period of time to just spend a couple minutes with you and talk.
Sure. No, I hope, anybody who listens to this, and I know there's many in the Chaney community and whatnot, hear this and, it's just a new perspective. It's something that whether you were a player on one of those teams, and talked to me every time you saw me, or never talked to me, or just saw me, knew I existed, but then to hear this side of things, think, oh, that's what was going on between those years, all those years and stuff. It's a new perspective, and kind of like, we said, we talked and I mentioned how I lived all this, yet there's perspectives that I hear and I'm like, oh, that's cool. I never knew that. It's just kind of, to me, what I hope is it's one more piece of the puzzle. It's one more thing that will kind of write itself. And that's why I think, what you guys are doing is so great is this is all a way of kind of documenting history, kind of putting things out there so that the people that lived it and the players that lived it and went through the program and the coaches and the fans and whoever else, administrators, they can hear this, and it's one more piece, like I said, of the puzzle, for them to kind of, conceptualize all this and say, oh, okay, it tells a story, it's one more part of it. So that, obviously you guys talked to me, I talked to you guys about doing this, and that was my goal in coming on, was to say, hey, I wasn't just there kind of like jumping up and down or playing sideline football and after the games and stuff just because I had nothing to do. There was method to the madness, and I like to think that a lot of it and a lot of the stuff that went on kind of shaped me, made me who I am and helped me get to where I've gone and still does. It's still something that I think a lot about and helps me, even to this day. So, yeah, that was kind of my main goal for doing that, and hopefully, other people, that'll be translated, into what other people pick up from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I for me, that's definitely what I've taken and to Ron's point, right? All of this experience and interaction and exposure, however you want to term it, to the Chaney program it comes in many forms, right? Yeah. From your young experience to me just finding my path there and how all of that ties into the rest of our lives and what it's done and how we're trying to pass that on to those that follow us in our fashion. So,
sure. And just to finalize, coming to team functions when you guys would, whether it be to the Ponderosa to eat or whether it be to the nursing home to sing, or I mean, that was, you talk about helping shape you. I mean, there was a method to that madness, exposing you to those things, I think serves you well as in becoming a professional.
You don't have to air this if you don't want. It's nothing bad, obviously. But I mean, I have to say, because I thought of it. There was like closer to the end, so I would have been. I guess I would have been like 13. We went to Old Country Kitchen, and my sister was there too. And he gets up to the register and he goes, "All right, well, this is all covered under the Gridiron Club, but I'm going to pay for these. These are my kids. She's 10 and he's 12." And my sister goes, "Dad, he's not 10. He's 13 or whatever. I'm 4 years older than Stephanie, so I may have been 14. I don't know." And he just looks at her and he goes, "He's 12." And she goes, "No, Dad, I'm telling you, I'm 10. He's 4 years older." And the poor guy who's working at Old Country Kitchen, he's like trying not to laugh, like just stand there looking. And my sister, God love her, she's trying to get so factual. Like it was her. She really believed he didn't know. She's like, "Dad, I was born in this year, and he was born." And what do you do as a parent? Now we can all talk about this because it's funny, but.
So he's trying to beat him out of a couple bucks.
Yeah, a couple bucks, for a kid's deal. And I don't know what happened. I remember walking away from it after I don't know what the resolution was, and him kind of looking at my sister and saying "What is the matter with you?" And her being genuinely upset, I didn't do anything wrong. I was telling the truth. I didn't think you knew. And then of course he kind of caught himself. I was like, "You're right. You were right. I shouldn't say anything."
Yeah, there was honorable and dishonorable in that, because the honorable thing was I didn't want the Gridiron Club to pay for
Right.
it.
Yeah. Right.
But the dishonorable thing was trying to beat him out of the price.
For a kid's meal. But yeah, I mean, we are part of all that stuff, man. We could sit here until tomorrow morning and tell those kinds of stories. You got a million of them, and that's the kind of stuff that's cool. Like when he comes over to my house, or we get together and Chaney. It's not like every time we see each other, we talk about Chaney football, obviously. Yeah. So kind of reliving some of this stuff, it's always fun. It's always good to go down that road.
Definitely. Well, this has been good, and there's an endless amount of conversations we can have. So we can definitely do it again. But I think it's been neat to hear some different perspective and good stories. So
yeah, no,